3 years ago, I drove past a small Amish farm just off Route 62 in Wayne County, Ohio. Nothing special about it from the road. A white fence, a hand-painted sign that said raw milk, $2 a quart. I almost didn't stop. But I did. I bought 2 quarts, put them in my truck, and drove home. And when I poured the first glass, I actually stopped and looked at it. The color was different. Not white. More like cream with a yellow tint, and it sat heavier in the glass. Almost like it didn't want to pour. I tasted it, and I put the glass down, because I genuinely could not understand what I was drinking. I've been buying milk my whole life. Whole milk, organic milk, grass-fed milk from those premium brands at the grocery store, where 1/2 gallon costs $8 and has a cow on a green field on the label. I thought I knew what good milk tasted like. I didn't. What was in that glass was something else entirely. It was thick. It was sweet without sugar in it. It had a depth of flavor I cannot describe to you. You would have to taste it. But the best way I can explain it is this. Grocery store milk tastes like water that remembers being milk. What I was drinking tasted like milk that had never been touched. I drove back the next morning and asked the man who lived there, I'll call him Samuel, how many cows he had. He said 7. I said, what do you feed them? He looked at me for a second, like I'd asked what color the sky was. Then he said, whatever's growing. That answer didn't make sense to me at the time. But it does now. And today, I'm going to explain exactly what he meant. Why it produces milk that is nutritionally, measurably, visually different from anything on a commercial dairy shelf. And why the dairy industry not only knows this, but has known this for over 100 years and chose a different direction anyway. Stay with me through the end of this video because I'm going to give you the complete pasture method. The rotation schedule, the specific plant species the Amish prioritize, and the one practice that costs absolutely nothing and makes the single biggest difference in milk quality. No equipment, no supplements, nothing to buy. Let's start with what you're actually drinking when you buy commercial milk, because I think most people have a picture in their heads that doesn't match reality. The average American Holstein dairy cow today produces somewhere between 75 and 100 pounds of milk per day. That's around 9 to 12 gallons per cow per day. Now stop and think about that number, because that is not a natural number. A cow nursing a calf produces maybe 1 to 2 gallons per day. What's happening at a commercial dairy is the biological equivalent of running an engine at maximum RPM every single day, from the time the animal is old enough to produce until it's spent. Most commercial dairy cows are culled, sent to slaughter, by age 4 or 5. Their natural lifespan is 20 years. To hit those production numbers, the modern dairy system made a series of decisions, each one reasonable in isolation, that together produce a product that is nutritionally hollowed out compared to what milk used to be. First decision, confinement. Most commercial dairy cows never set foot on grass. They live on concrete, in stalls, in climate-controlled barns. This maximizes efficiency. You can fit more animals in less space, control their diet precisely, and manage their production schedule. Second decision, grain-heavy feeding. Grass-fed cows produce less milk than grain-fed cows, pound for pound. So commercial operations shifted to high-energy grain rations. Corn, soy, distillers' grains. To push volume up. Third decision, homogenization and high-temperature pasteurization. These processes extend shelf life and allow milk to be transported thousands of miles. But they also break apart fat molecules, destroy naturally occurring enzymes, and flatten the fat content into a uniform suspension that doesn't exist in nature. The result is a product that is technically milk. It's white. It has protein and calcium, but it has been optimized for volume, shelf life, and transport. Not for nutrition, not for flavor, and not for the animal that produced it. Here is one number that captures this entire problem. Conjugated linoleic acid, CLA, is a naturally occurring fatty acid in milk fat that researchers have linked to immune function, metabolic health, and body composition. Grass-fed milk contains between 3 and 5 times more CLA than grain-fed milk. Some studies put it even higher depending on the season and the specific pasture. That's not a small difference. That's not a marginal nutritional tweak. That is a fundamentally different food. The Amish didn't choose their method because they read nutrition research. They chose it because it's how their grandparents did it, and their grandparents' grandparents, going back 300 years. But the research has since caught up and confirmed what anyone who has tasted both already knows. When Samuel told me his cows eat whatever's growing, I assumed he meant they just walk around a field all day. Simple, unmanaged, natural. That's not what he meant. What the Amish practice, and have practiced since their European roots, going back to farming communities in Switzerland and Germany in the 1600s, is a specific system called rotational grazing. And the way they do it is distinct enough from even modern grass-fed operations that it deserves its own name. Let me explain what it looks like on the ground. Samuel's 7 cows don't roam a single large pasture freely. They move. Every 2 to 3 days, he moves them to a fresh section of the field using temporary fencing. Simple wire, wooden posts, moved by hand. The section they just left goes untouched for anywhere from 21 to 45 days, depending on the season and the growth rate of the grass. This does 3 things that are invisible unless you know what you're looking at. First, it keeps the grass at its nutritional peak. Grass, when it's young, between 4 and 8 inches tall, is at its highest concentration of sugars, proteins, and the plant compounds that directly translate into milk quality. Once grass gets tall and starts to seed out, those nutrients are redirected into seed production and stem structure. It becomes fibrous, lower in protein, and nutritionally less dense. By rotating the cows onto fresh ground every few days, Samuel ensures they are almost always eating grass that is at its peak window. This is something that sounds simple but is almost impossible to replicate in a set-it-and-forget-it grazing system. Second, it protects the root system and ensures regrowth. When cows graze the same section of ground continuously, they don't just eat the grass. They graze it down to the crown, which is the growing point of the plant. Damage the crown and the grass doesn't come back, or comes back slowly and weakly. The pasture thins out, bare patches appear, and weeds move in to fill the gaps. Rotational grazing gives each section a full recovery period before the cows return. The roots deepen between cycles. The plant builds energy reserves. The regrowth comes in thicker and more nutritious than it would under continuous grazing. After several years of this system, Amish pastures look and behave differently than conventionally grazed land. The root mass is deeper. The soil is spongier. It holds more water. The plant diversity increases because different species have time to establish. And the soil itself, the microbial life in it, the earthworm populations, the fungal networks, is richer and more active. Third, it triggers what some farmers call the flush effect. When a cow moves onto fresh pasture after even 2 or 3 days on depleted ground, there is a measurable spike in milk production and milk fat content within 24 to 48 hours. The animal is responding to the sudden availability of high-sugar, high-protein forage. The milk that comes out in that window is noticeably richer. Higher fat, higher protein, more of the aromatic compounds that give the milk its distinctive flavor. Samuel knows this. He doesn't think about it in terms of research or biochemistry. He just knows that the milk is better right after a move, and he times his milking accordingly. Here is where it gets specific, and this is the part that most people who write about Amish farming never get to, because they stop at rotational grazing and think that's the whole answer. It isn't. The specific plants growing in the pasture matter enormously, and the Amish management of their pasture plant communities is one of the least understood aspects of why their milk is different. Most commercial grass-fed operations and most modern rotational grazing systems are built on monocultures or simple mixes of 2 or 3 grass species, typically ryegrass, orchard grass, or tall fescue. These are high-yielding, easy to establish, and well understood in terms of production. Amish pastures, particularly older ones that have been managed the same way for multiple generations, tend to have far higher plant diversity. And this isn't an accident. Let me walk you through the specific plants that show up repeatedly in Amish pastures and what they contribute to milk. Chicory. Chicory has a taproot that can go 4 to 6 feet into the soil, pulling up minerals. Calcium, phosphorus, magnesium. That shallow-rooted grasses can't reach. When cows eat chicory, those minerals move through the animal and into the milk. Milk from pastures with high chicory content has measurably higher mineral density. Chicory also contains compounds that have been shown to reduce intestinal parasite loads in ruminants, which means healthier animals that convert feed more efficiently. Amish farmers in the older communities don't plant chicory deliberately. They don't have to. It's already there because their pastures haven't been chemically treated to eliminate it, and the rotational cycle allows it to establish and persist. Red and white clover. This one is more widely known, but the specifics matter. Clover is a legume. It fixes atmospheric nitrogen directly into the soil through root nodules, which means Amish pastures are naturally fertilizing themselves without any synthetic input. More importantly for milk quality, clover is extremely high in protein and contains phytoestrogens and isoflavones that influence the fat composition of the milk. Milk from clover-rich pastures consistently shows higher butterfat percentages and a more complex flavor profile. The fat itself has a different fatty acid composition, higher in omega-3s, more balanced omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. Samuel had clover throughout his pastures. Not planted, just there, growing alongside the grasses because the system supported it. Plantain. Not the banana, broadleaf plantain, the common weed that grows in almost every pasture. This plant is one of the most nutritionally dense forages available to ruminants, and most farmers treat it as a pest and spray it out. It contains high levels of tannins, which reduce bloat risk in cattle and improve the efficiency of protein digestion. It also contains aucuben, an iridoid glycoside that supports kidney function and tissue repair in grazing animals. When cows have access to plantain and choose to eat it, which they do voluntarily in significant quantities when it's available, their overall health markers improve. Fewer vet interventions, better body condition scores, and milk that, anecdotally and increasingly by measurement, shows improved composition. Wild garlic and yarrow appear in trace quantities in many older Amish pastures as well. Both have antimicrobial properties that researchers believe may contribute to the notably low mastitis rates in Amish herds compared to commercial operations. Mastitis, infection of the udder, is the single most common reason commercial dairy farmers use antibiotics. Amish farmers treat mastitis far less frequently, which most observers attribute to a combination of lower stress on the animals, better bedding practices, and, possibly, the incidental antimicrobial compounds the cows consume through diverse pasture plants. The summary of all this is straightforward. The Amish aren't feeding their cows a carefully formulated ration optimized for milk production. They're allowing their cows to graze a complex, living ecosystem that has been building in complexity and depth for generations. And the cows, given access to that system, self-select a diet that produces milk that no supplement program can replicate. If I had to point to the single factor that most separates Amish milk from commercial milk, the one underneath everything else, it isn't the grazing rotation. It isn't the plant diversity. It's the soil. And this is the part that's hardest to explain quickly, because it requires understanding something that most people who weren't raised on a farm never learned. Soil is not dirt. Dirt is what's on your boots. Soil is a living system. A single teaspoon of healthy pasture soil contains more living organisms than there are humans on Earth. Bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, arthropods. This community of organisms is what makes minerals available to plants, what breaks down organic matter, what creates the spongy structure that allows water infiltration and root penetration. And this living system is extraordinarily sensitive to disruption. A synthetic nitrogen fertilizer, the kind applied to almost every commercial pasture and hay field in America, feeds plants directly but bypasses and eventually suppresses the microbial community in the soil. The plants grow fast. They look green, but they're growing on chemical input rather than biological cycling. The soil organisms that would normally make trace minerals available to plant roots are crowded out by the bacterial bloom that follows nitrogen application, then crash when the nitrogen is metabolized. The same is true of herbicides applied to eliminate weeds like chicory and plantain, which, as we just discussed, are nutritionally valuable forages, and of the tillage that follows when a pasture is renovated and reseeded with high-yield varieties. Every one of these interventions makes the pasture easier to manage and more predictable in the short term, and every one of them degrades the living system underneath. The Amish pastures, particularly those managed by families who have farmed the same ground for 3 or 4 generations without chemical inputs, have soil that behaves and tests differently from conventionally managed land. Higher organic matter percentages, higher cation exchange capacity, which determines how well the soil holds and releases minerals, higher earthworm populations, higher fungal biomass. Plants growing in that soil draw from a biological bank account that has been accumulating for decades. They carry more minerals, more complex carbohydrates, more secondary plant compounds. And those compounds, the ones that make the plants richer, move directly into the milk when a cow eats them. This is why you cannot fully replicate Amish milk quality by simply putting commercial dairy cows on grass. The grass matters. The specific plants matter, but the soil underneath the grass is the foundation that makes all of it possible. Samuel's pasture had been in his family for 4 generations. His great-great-grandfather had cleared that land and grazed cattle on it. No synthetic fertilizers, no herbicides, no renovation and reseeding. Just rotation, manure cycling, and time. The soil there is something that cannot be built in a season or 5 seasons. It took 150 years. And the milk it produces is the direct expression of that 150-year accumulation. I want to be clear about something before I go further, because I'm not interested in telling you the dairy industry is evil or corrupt. That's not what happened. What happened is a series of rational decisions made by rational people, each one responding to real market pressures. And those decisions, compounded over 80 years, produced the system we have today. After World War II, 2 things happened simultaneously. The American population grew rapidly and moved to cities, and agricultural chemistry. The technology that had been developed partly for wartime production became commercially available at scale. The pressure on the dairy industry was simple: produce more milk, faster, for less money, to feed a growing urban population that had no access to local farms. The solution the industry chose was consolidation, confinement, and chemical inputs. Exactly the system we have today. It worked. Per cow milk production tripled over the following 60 years. Milk prices, adjusted for inflation, dropped. The country had more milk than it knew what to do with. But the animal changed in the process. The breed selection that produced those high-yielding Holsteins was optimized purely for volume. A modern Holstein is essentially a biological machine for converting grain into milk. It doesn't thrive on grass alone. Its rumen has been bred for decades toward grain fermentation. Put a modern Holstein on a traditional Amish pasture and it would produce less milk, not more, at least initially, because the entire animal is calibrated for a different diet. Amish dairy cattle are typically different breeds: brown Swiss, milking Shorthorns, Jerseys, and crosses between them. These breeds produce less milk by volume than Holsteins, but the milk they produce has significantly higher fat and protein content. A Jersey cow might give 5 gallons a day versus a Holstein's 10. But the Jersey's milk might have 5% butterfat versus the Holstein's 3.2%. You need less Jersey milk to make the same amount of butter, cheese, or cream. The Amish didn't choose Jerseys because of data. They chose them because those animals worked on their farms. They thrived on pasture. They were easy to handle. They were hardy enough to manage without intensive veterinary intervention. The nutritional outcome is a byproduct of those practical choices. I want to give you something real to take from this video, because I know most of you aren't going to buy 7 cows and start a rotational grazing system tomorrow. But the principles here translate into things that are actually useful. If you have even a quarter acre of land and a single dairy animal, a cow, a goat, a sheep, here is the most important thing you can do: stop grazing it uniformly. Divide it. Even if your rotation is just 2 sections that you alternate on a 2-week cycle, you will see a measurable difference in the plant density, the quality of the forage, and, if you're producing milk, the quality and yield of that milk within 1 full growing season. Temporary fencing for a quarter-acre rotation costs less than $100 in materials and takes an afternoon to set up. This is not complicated. Samuel does this with wooden stakes and a roll of polywire that he's been using for 15 years. If you don't have land or animals, here's how this information changes how you shop. The phrase grass-fed on a milk label means something, but it doesn't mean everything. By USDA standards, a cow can be labeled grass-fed if it receives at least 30% of its dry matter from grass. That is not the same as what you just heard described. What to look for instead: small-scale local dairies, preferably direct sale or farmer's market, where you can ask questions. How long has this land been farmed? Do you rotate your animals? What breeds are you milking? What's growing in your pasture besides grass? If a farmer looks at you like you asked an interesting question rather than a strange one, you're probably in the right place. If you want to understand the soil piece more deeply, the single most illuminating thing you can do costs nothing. Go get a quart of Amish raw milk from a local source if it's legal in your state. Go buy the most expensive organic grass-fed milk at your grocery store. Put them side by side. Shake both. Look at how the cream separates. Smell them. Taste them. You will understand everything I said in this video the moment you do that comparison. No chart, no research paper, no YouTube video will explain it better than that direct experience. Samuel didn't think of himself as doing anything unusual when I asked him if he'd ever considered scaling up. More cows, a bigger operation, selling to a co-op. He looked at his pasture for a second and then looked at me. He said, "I can't milk more than my land can hold. The land has a number. You go past that number, you start owing the land." I've thought about that line more times than I can count since that morning on Route 62. He wasn't talking about sustainability as a concept. He wasn't making a political statement. He was describing a constraint he had accepted. That the system he was part of had a natural limit, and that working inside that limit produced something extraordinary, and working outside it would eventually produce nothing. The dairy industry went outside that limit. Not out of malice. Out of necessity, out of scale, out of the pressure to feed a country that had stopped producing its own food. And it succeeded by every metric it was designed to measure. But what it produced isn't what Samuel was making. And now you know why. If this video gave you something worth thinking about, hit the like button and leave a comment below. I read every single one. Tell me if you've ever tasted the difference. And subscribe if you want more of this. Because we're going back to source on everything. The old methods, the forgotten knowledge, the things that worked before there was an industry built around replacing them. I'll see you in the next one.